right, the UFC title shots have been a mess for the last 12 months with the amount of completely undeserved title shots being given out. Let me just go over some in the last 12 months alone, okay? We had Leon Edwards versus Colby Covington. We had Sean O'Malley versus Chito Vera. We had Dricus du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya. We had Alex Pereira versus Khalil Roundtree. Now coming up this week, we have John Jones versus Stipe Miocic. All of these are horribly undeserving shots for the title. Not one of these contenders should have got to fight for the belt. And I'm sure you knew that by just, me listing off the names of all of those. I'm sure you remember the uproar for every single one of those fights being announced. So that's 5 title shots that were undeserved in the last 12 months. That's absolutely insane. Now, of course, there have been bad title shots in the past, but they were typically due to circumstances that were completely valid. For example, Yoel Romero got a title shot against Israel Adesanya despite losing his previous fight, which was a #1 contender fight, but it's because the guy who won that #1 contender fight, Paulo Costa, was injured that he got that title shot. So you know what? It helps keep the champ active. Could be worse. Let's look at, say, the welterweight belt over the last year. Specifically last December, Belal Muhammad was the rightful #1 contender. He was not injured. He could have fought Leon Edwards last year, but nope, Colby, he's the man, bro. He's the champ. I mean, if not for Usman, he's the champ, bro. Give him the shot. I mean, we probably could have already had title fights with Shavkat and JDM if Belal got the title shot back in December. Was it really worth that Colby versus Edwards fight? No, that fight was awful. And I doubt the pay-per-view buys were really so amazing to make up for it. Like Donald Trump's, whose favorite fighter was at one point Colby Chaos Covington, walked out during his time on the mic after the fight. That's how bad this fight was. So at the time, it's fair to say, yeah, Belal is boring and Colby's very entertaining, so why not throw Colby in there instead? Which, I mean, fair enough. But with hindsight, it should be easy to see that Belal has of course been much more game to fight contenders than either Leon Edwards or Colby Covington. So look at that. It's actually worked out a lot better for the division by actually giving the #1 contender the shot at the title. Because I think what happens here is Belal knows, oh, I kinda got screwed, I'm not gonna screw someone else. Now, of course, I'm purposely using examples of fights that turned out to be extremely boring in the case of Yoel Romero versus Israel Adesanya, as well as Colby Covington versus Leon Edwards. But of course, there have been undeserved title shots that were amazing fights as well. Most recently, of course, was Alex Pereira versus Khalil Roundtree, which is honestly a really underrated fight. Let me just rant about that for a second. Because after this fight, most people were going on about how much of a dog, how much of a warrior Khalil Roundtree is. He beats people up like they owe him money. But yes, that's all absolutely true, but I don't see a lot of people talking about how insanely fun this fight was. Of course, Jan Blachowicz made it close with Alex Pereira when they fought, but that was through grappling. But Khalil took 2 rounds off Alex through striking, so you had a really intense feeling watching this fight, seeing Alex actually be losing for once. Not to mention how entirely brutal that super long, near round-long finishing sequence was. Crazy. But anyways, great fight. But just because Khalil Roundtree is more entertaining than Magomed Ankalaev doesn't mean Khalil should have gotten that title shot over Big Ank. Yes, I understand that Ankalaev was begging to fight in Abu Dhabi against Alex Pereira and such, but still doesn't mean that he should have been skipped over. They should have just made him fight in Salt Lake City instead. And so now you have people criticizing Alex Pereira for not fighting Magomed Ankalaev. However, I do believe that Alex will fight whoever the UFC puts in front of him. They are just putting off the Magomed Ankalaev fight to keep the current face of the UFC a champ for longer. I do think a more obvious example of a champ ducking the #1 contender, however, was Sean O'Malley fighting Chito Vera instead of Merab Dvalishvili. Now, the argument I've heard from more casual fans is, well, Sean O'Malley's got to get that loss back, bro. No, that's stupid. Let's compare that to a champ who is game, and that's the legend himself, Belal, remember the name, Muhammad. He lost to Jeff Neal 5 years ago. Today, Jeff Neal is ranked number 10 in the welterweight division. Now, who did Belal Muhammad decide to make his first title fence against? If he were Sean O'Malley, he would have taken the fight in number 10 ranked Jeff Neal. Instead, he plans to fight number 3 ranked undefeated Shavkat Rakhmonov, who has finished every opponent he has faced. There's a big difference between the champs there. And yes, I understand Belal got injured, he had to pull out, but you look at the intent, and it sounds like Bilal is regardless going to come back and fight Shavkat, or maybe the winner of a Shavkat versus Kamaru Usman matchup sometime next year. Now, not every #1 contender is the best person in the world when they finally get their title shot and win. I'm absolutely a member of the Merab Mafia. I was cheering for him the entire fight when he was dominating Sean O'Malley. However, Merab Dvalishvili's blatant attempts at ducking Umar Nurmagomedov have been ridiculous. Instead, he insists on fighting Deiveson Figueiredo. While yes, there is a good argument Figgy is more deserving of a title shot than Umar, with how scared Merab acts of Umar, it makes you want to see that fight a whole heck of a lot more. So, okay, sometimes #1 contenders are really awesome, great champs when they finally get their championship reign, but sometimes they're going to be really annoying. But hey, that's the risk you've gotta take. You know, this is a sport, not an entertainment product like the WWE. Of course, it's meant to be entertaining, but you know, it's still a sport. Then, I'm not going to go into as much depth as this one, but of course, Dricus du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya, again, that had a lot of beef seemingly going into it. Adesanya does a lot of pay-per-view buys. That's obviously the reason they made that fight. I understand the reason the UFC gives out these title shots, as we've discussed in this video. There's a pretty couple valid reasons for this one. You're trying to protect a champion who's generally entertaining or does good pay-per-view sales, such as Sean O'Malley or Alex Pereira. Which, you know what? Fair enough. The longer those guys are champs, the more money that the UFC is going to make. On the other hand, Dana, you know, his goal is to make cool fights. It makes sense why he would try and make more entertaining fights, especially when the #1 contender is someone who's considered quite boring, such as the case with pretty much all the people we've talked about today, whether it's Merab Dvalishvili, Bilal Muhammad, and Magomed Ankalaev. I mean, Magomed Ankalaev I don't think is actually that boring, but a lot of people see him that way. But again, I also thought Merab versus Sean O'Malley was fun to watch, so my opinions are clearly garbage. Anyways, the UFC is seemingly successful at both of these goals. For example, if Sean O'Malley fought Merab instead of Chito Vera back at UFC 299, then the UFC couldn't have had Sean O'Malley headline at the UFC Sphere event. Or if, say, Alex Pereira fought Magomed Ankalaev back at UFC 300 and lost, it's fair to guess Magomed Ankalaev wouldn't have stepped up to save UFC 303 and UFC 307 like Alex did, or in general have been at an all similar level of activity. But like I said before, you still gotta have integrity in the sport. And so if we continue to hold up divisions for years and years to come by continuing to give out title shots this bad, I do think that does eventually, you know, permanently damage the UFC. It'll negatively impact the sport in the long run because, you know, you're gonna start seeing people who give up on their main style of fighting because they're going to try and be more entertaining, try and get close to that title shot, and that's going to just probably prevent them from getting a title shot, you know? You saw Muhammad Micheal was having this issue before he got cut. They were saying, you got to have a more exciting fight style, we're going to cut you, which seems a little ridiculous. He was undefeated. Just because he's boring, they cut him? That's ridiculous. And again, of course, bad title shots have been given out before in UFC history, but just not to this level, where nearly half of the pay-per-view headliners in the last 12 months were realistically quite undeserved title shots. But now let's talk about the elephant in the room, or maybe I should say the duck in the room, the really, really big duck, Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic. This is the one I really don't understand. While Jon Jones doesn't do bad on pay-per-view sales and ticket sales, it's not like he's a top star of the sport. He's no McGregor, he's no Rousey. Why is Dana White so hell-bent on making this fight? Let's go with the reasons for bad title shots we've covered in this video, and you guys will see none of them really apply to this fight. Is it because this is going to be a super entertaining fight? I don't think so. Jon Jones is really not that exciting of a fighter, at least he hasn't been for several years, and Stipe Miocic, yes, is an entertaining fighter, but how entertaining is he going to be after several years of a layoff at his age? I feel like he's going to become in that cage quite slow. I certainly doubt he'll be as exciting as someone like Tom Aspinall, who's only gone past the first round once in his entire UFC career and holds the record for shortest average fight time in the UFC history, and someone who's, you know, not over the age of 40. And is Stipe Miocic a giant pay-per-view star or something? I mean, not really. I doubt any more so than Tom Aspinall, especially if you had Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall somewhere in England. I bet that does crazy good for ticket sales. So this fight's probably not going to be that super entertaining. It's probably not going to do giant pay-per-view sales. So how about reason number 3? They're trying to protect a star. Well, that doesn't make sense either, because it seems like Jon Jones is going to retire after this fight anyways. Why not let Aspinall make his name even bigger by being the first guy to officially beat Jon Jones? He's going to be around for a long time. You can have him headline in England every year, and you can have him flex that official Jon Jones win. So of course, Jon's lost before, just not on paper. Now, what about another argument? Dana White is trying to protect Jon Jones as the supposed GOAT of the sport by not having him lose to Tom Aspinall. This makes no sense to me. Don't you want to be constantly pushing newer fighters as being the GOAT? That way you can advertise them as, you know, being GOATs or top pound for pound fighters. Doesn't it make more sense to push Islam Makhachev or Alex Pereira as the #1 pound for pound fighter over Jon Jones when they're going to continue to make the UFC money for years to come? And if it's about legacy, why do we need to protect Jon Jones' legacy so much? Why are we trying to protect this drug-cheating, wife-beating, horrible person? Wouldn't it be a lot better of a look for the UFC if what is pretty much their official position of having Jon Jones as being their official GOAT? Why not push, say, GSP in that position? He's a much better role model. You know, he's not out here popping for steroids all the time and just wasn't just beating up a bunch of washed up middleweights. Since right now, with all the advertisements for this fight, they're pushing the Jon Jones GOAT narrative. Why does it matter so much specifically that this guy, Jon Jones, is the GOAT? Why must it be him? What kind of dirt does he have on Dana? So yeah, as a lot of people have said, I've got to agree with that sentiment. Title shot makes no sense. Now, I pray that Jon Jones gets his karma. I pray that Stipe Miocic flashline KSO him. It would be a beautiful way to serve up karma to Jon Jones, who's had it coming to him for a very long time. But sadly, I don't think that's going to happen. Jon Jones is going to get a boring 49-46 decision and retire. Sadly, as much as MMA Guru might love to imagine it, I don't think we're going to see the casual fans at Madison Square Garden chanting Aspinall's names during Jon's retirement speech either, as much as, you know, I would love for that to happen. I don't think the UFC is going to let Tom in the cage and let him have a face-off with Jon either. Comment down below, what do you think about this trend? Do you think it will continue? And tell me how whiny I sounded this entire video. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.